Hi everyone, this is YMP TV, and as you know, we've been recording interviews with a series of executive in mining, women in mining on the current situation, COVID-19, their thoughts on the market and what's coming up next. And today we have Zenzi Awases, Senior Exploration Geologist at Debmarine, Namibia, and also President of Women in Mining Association of Namibia. Hi Zenzi, thank you for joining us.
Hi Bianca, hi from very cold Windhoek, Namibia to all of you out there.
So I guess I'll dive in right away, but with our question that everyone has on their mind, it's how has COVID-19 affected the mining industry in Africa?
So I don't think it's just an Africa-specific thing, but definitely I'll try and localize it to Namibia and then go into Africa a little bit. But I'm sure you attended the webinar we had last week with the Voices of Women in Mining Africa. But in Namibia specific, because mining is it's an import-export business. So you extract from here and then our markets are international. So that was the number one effect, that we couldn't do our sales. So sales were affected. I don't have numbers, unfortunately, but you can feel the effect it has pretty much on, I don't think there's been a lot of layoffs per se in the mining industry, but we had to reduce the number of hours we were working. Especially because of lockdown, you had to, because there was a national lockdown announced around the 17th of March. So we had to see, some mining companies had to apply and prove that they were an essential service. So you cannot, and then if they do, if it was approved, you had to only put skeleton staff on the ground. So it meant that those people, had to go to work. So those who were not regarded as essential services lost out on their income, for example. Not directly, but it was a reduced amount because now you're not getting a shift allowance anymore, etc. So it had a small but very impactful impact, if that makes sense, on the mining industry. In Africa, the rest of Africa, the same thing, you know. Like with the small scale miners, for example, the ladies, or I think anybody else who owns a mining concession could not go into those areas due to lockdown restrictions. So it's an effect that's been felt straight in the pocket by a lot of those who are involved in the mining industry.
And do you think the impact of COVID-19 was different for women in mining?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, my word. Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, it's a very, I've always, when we started this thing, and one of your next questions is how do we start Women in Mining in Namibia? But one of the things I've maintained is that I don't think when we entered the industry that we thought of ourselves as women in mining. I certainly didn't look at myself as a woman in mining. I'm entering an industry geologist and my colleague as a mining engineer. I mean, we are in an era now, I like to call it the enlightened era, where you have, you can now see female truck drivers. So, but the question is, how are we affected? And I said last week that we became super moms, because while you're still a woman in mining, you are still the primary caregiver. A child, when he gets injured, will not run to his daddy immediately. He'll run to his mom, regardless. So you had to basically, especially when you became a non-essential service provider to the mine, so you had to work from home. So you would be balancing looking after the child, who has now to do e-learning. So you have to do a Zoom meeting. Let's take this particular Zoom meeting, for example. I literally had to leave them behind, because if I had been at home where the two of them are, they would have been interrupting me, for example. So I have to leave them at home with meaningful stuff to do. I left them with homework, which I'm going to go check out online in an hour's time. And then you have to do virtual meetings. Right. You have to ensure that, because I also mentioned that the mining industry is a 24-hour operation, especially in large-scale mining. It's a 24-hour operation which requires answers at any given time. So you're going to have to still ensure that you are able to do your job or you perform your duty, and then while under lockdown. So I'm not saying that it didn't affect the males as much, but I think we felt it especially.
And then do you think the mining industry or mining companies will operate differently in a post-COVID world?
That's my wish. That is definitely the wish of anybody else. You know, one of the most interesting things for me always in my career was when they would say to us that, oh, you're a mom, so unfortunately we can't give you this responsibility. If there's one thing that COVID-19 has proven is that we can still be a mom and be a woman in mining without in any affecting the industry negatively. So I think that's the one, I'm going to say, positive thing that came out of it. So my desire is that it can be seen as such. One of the things that it highlighted was digitization, because almost immediately a lot of the mines would say, oh, you know what, we actually do want more women to come in, but now we are stuck with the thing of the physical ability. So maybe if we digitize the mining system, we will get more women in. True, but now it has proven that it's actually not a nice to have, it's a have to have. It's a necessity, you know, so we can operate mines remotely. And so, of course, there are those instances like in geology. That's the one, because I'm a geologist. So whenever I go to conferences and look at innovative ways to mine, the new way of mining, I always say, you know, you can automate anything, but I'm yet to find how we will automate logging coal at an exploration camp. How would you do that? You still need a physical body. And we've got females who are sitting at a camp in offsite. So we're gonna have to think of ways to get there, but I believe that after all of this, we are definitely gonna have to relook at how we do things. We're gonna have to really, should I say enforce? We will have to make it an option to be able to work from home. Flexibility will have to be almost a thing now, because we have shown that we can work from home and still deliver. So one of the things that I'm really, really desiring will come out of all of this is that we revisit our input-output performance measures. You know, I loved what one of my senior managers said the other day, that, and it wasn't aimed at any gender, and then because he said you could almost see that people, the output is so much, should I say, quicker, because you're working almost at your own time, but you also know that there's a responsibility. So it's not a tick box thing. You can literally still, I can churn out 3-4 reports. That's pushing it, but yeah, then it would be when you're in the office, because when you're in the office, you've got phone calls, you've got somebody who's coming. So at home, you pace your time, but you still deliver. The turnaround time is much quicker. So I think that is, for me, the one positive thing that came out of COVID-19 in the mining industry. We definitely have to relook at the way we've been doing things. Almost like we were forced to relook at the way we did things. And I have to commend really also how quick the industry was at adapting to the changes. I know with the company I work for, lockdown was announced on the 17th, and our exco went, I don't want, you know, I always joke when I said they went undercover, but those guys around the clock, they were looking at, because I don't think the world was ready for COVID-19 or lockdown. And not just mining industry. My sister works in a totally different industry, and we were talking over the weekend. And she said, for example, it became very clear that nobody, whether it's private sector or public sector, no risk management system had this in mind. So we are forced to look at ways that we measure risk, and this is almost number one on the list. What would you do if a pandemic comes, but you have to still be a contributor to the GDP? So, you know, our industry responded almost immediately, and day to day, as changes were coming in, as numbers were increasing or decreasing, they had ways to make sure that their employees were well taken care of, and yet they were still productive. And I really, really commend the industry for doing that.
Wow. And just to go back on the issue of gender, do you think COVID-19 will create more opportunity for an inclusive industry?
look, if they don't, then, well, we're going to have to relook things. I, you know, for me, what I find interesting, Bianca, and I know we're jumping across questions here, but we're going to get there eventually, is that inclusion, it's almost like it was the magic word that was missing in gender equality. And inclusion for me is such a beautiful term. And because we no longer have to be looked at, we no longer have to be looked at as, oh, you are here to fill numbers. No, they are now being looked at as actually, you know, and that she's here because she's qualified to do what she studied for and what she's been working in. And I think people will really understand what inclusion means. However, the biggest barrier to inclusion is unconscious bias.
Right.
I always ask the question, when I say to you a career in engineering, what gender comes to mind? And without a shadow of doubt, they say male. And if I say to you career in nursing, they would say female. And that, unfortunately, is still, it's unfortunate, yes, it's still the biggest barrier. I think people have gone past looking at you as a female geologist. I'm hoping so in any case, but they still see you as a female and a caregiver. And I know that I've learned now, we've been in existence for 3 years now, I've learned that the issue really has been education. People didn't understand what we mean with equal opportunities. You know, so I think all of this has highlighted what we mean with inclusion and what we can deliver. So absolutely, I think people think I'm too optimistic, and there's nothing wrong with being optimistic.
Right.
But I really do believe that we have no choice but to look at inclusion as an option.
And I want to talk about a bit more about your involvement in the industry and the community. It's like, so I know in April 2017, you were chosen as the president of the first ever Women in Mining Association in Namibia. Can you tell us a bit more about this association?
So it's actually a very, I want to call it a funny story. We started 2017, 2016, let me just start with how I got here. In 2015, I received my 10-year certificate in the industry. And I remember thinking, this can't be it, man. I'm frustrated. I couldn't measure my frustration. I couldn't put a finger on it. I was just like, I'm done, okay? I need to bow out. But I think a number of things stood out for me. It's almost like the proverbial flaps opened up from the eyes, and I realized that I've been doing this for so long, and somebody who I shared university benches with has been my manager pretty much most of my career. So I thought, nah, it's time that I leave the industry. I was convinced, Bianca, that I'm leaving the industry. Wow. So that was 2015. In 2016, I signed up for business school in Stellenbosch in South Africa. And then while I'm there, ironically, the topic of gender equality would just come in. And I was really not even aware of it. I mean, I was, but I didn't think about it in my industry. So I would just, but when I came back in towards the end of 2016, when I finished with my studies, beginning 2017, we got, the entire industry got an invitation to participate in this conference. It was called the Leadership Development for Women in Mining. And it caught my attention because there's never been such a thing in Namibia. We've seen them happening in South Africa. I've heard of International Women in Mining, but we never had a conference for just women. So I remember going around in the company I work for, because the invitation was for 10 women. So I went to almost every lady I know. I'm like, guy, put your hand up for this thing. We have to attend this thing. So it was very nice. It was spearheaded by our Deputy Minister of Mines and Energy, who's female, Mrs. Cornelia Shilunga. And we arrived at the conference. There were about 10 mining houses that put there, 10 ladies approximately. So we were there, 100 ladies. The only male there were two males, was the deputy minister's PA, as well as the guy who was doing the sounds, females. And then we realized we were saying the same thing. Although we are passionate about our careers, we kind of feel left out, you know? We had ladies who've got master's degrees in geology, masters in this, yet the highest they would get was supervisory. There were 2 or 3 ladies who went beyond supervisory level. And at the end of that conference, we got together and we're like, here's our resolution. We are gonna have to get together and put an association together. Initially, we were looked at as, what do you call these, the word is gone, like a protest group. You know,
wow.
and I guess, and I don't blame them for thinking that, because we were very aggressive in our language, and you will hear us. And I remember at the launch, eventually, in fact, it was the company I worked for who paid for our registration in September, and then we launched the industry in November. And it was in that time, preparing for my speech, that I realized, but we've got a serious problem. If you look at the statistics, we are so not doing well. I mean, you know, at that point, we had only 20% representation in the senior management, executive directorship in the mining, and that was 2 out of 20 women, I think, and 2 women out of 20 executives in the entire country were in the executive team. And I said, but this cannot be celebrated. What are we doing about it? And that's how we've been. And really, the message has been from the word go. It's not even about equality, because we've diversity, because the industry has been diverse. While the industry has been diverse all along, because if it wasn't, I wouldn't be a geologist for 15 years. What the industry has lacked all along is inclusion. So our message was consistent, and is still consistent. Inclusion. If it means we have to educate until we no longer need a WiM group to educate you, that's what we're gonna do. So, and then we would point out small little things, such as, you've brought us to the industry, yet it's very rare that you would find a toilet or a change room for females on the mine side. They would like, that's not true. And then after a while, you're right. Or you'd be, you brought us here, yet you've got terms such as foreman. Why don't we change to team lead? Because when it's a female, what do you call a forewoman? Come on now, you want to say small, very, very, very small, but subtle, but very powerful changes. And over time, people realize that actually this is not a protest group. This is a group that's got a very important message. And so we're now in existence for 3 years. I still think people might say that we haven't achieved much, but I think we've achieved a lot. In 3 years, we are being recognized as by some as partners, you know, to the industry. And if anything, after this COVID-19, they have to recognize us as partners. So we are being called upon for empowerment talks, what our thoughts are, but we specifically want to be called upon in the mining industry, how to get involved in making changes, legal changes, procedural changes, policy changes to make a difference in the mining industry.
So still on the topic of inclusion and diversity, but I want to hear your thoughts on it. So the United Nations has embedded gender equality in the Sustainable Development Goals, and women in association have made a lot of progress on gender equality in mining, in our industry, I guess. But in your opinion, we need what do we need to do to have more, I guess, like gender equality in this sector, or like you use inclusion or diversity?
So I actually want to correct that a little bit. I don't think we've made progress in gender equality. Gender equality is an equation. It's gender diversity plus inclusion equals gender equality. So we have done a very big progress with diversity, right? Then the question, why are we not equal? Why do we need WiM groups? Women in mining groups? Why do we need advocacy groups to still be saying, no, we are not there yet? It's because you're not included. And with inclusion, we mean Because you must remember when, especially in South Africa, in Namibia as well, one of the requirements in terms of trying to diversify the industry is a quota system. I think it was just 2 years ago when it was said that 25% of any board or appointments have to be female. Fantastic move. But now what happens is diversity has become a numbers game. Wow. So now what do you and I love sharing, I'll email it to you. I love sharing this cartoon of the leaky pipeline. So what diversity has done is that you've got all these females that are being, together with males, that are being sort of forced into this pipe, right? But as you go up the ladder, whether it's corporate or not, you start seeing that the number of females dwindle out, okay? And that is still reality. So that's not equal. The equality then is down here by the entry level, which is great. But that girl or that female will not make it all the way out. She never does make it all the way up there, because that's when it really matters. So no, we are very far off from actually achieving SDG 5 in the mining industry, or in any. Yeah, no, I will be specific to my industry because I don't have the knowledge of others. But we are very far from achieving SDG 5 in the mining industry. We did fantastic with diversity. I'm telling you, anywhere you look, graduation, go to any graduation ceremony, and when it comes to engineering, geology, especially geology, you'll have more females graduating than males do, right? Then you look at the industry and then you say, yeah, after 15 years, I'm still in the middle management sector. 15 years, and you're still in the middle, then it's a problem. So we don't have the equal play field. The play field is not yet fair, but we are getting there. And I think with persistent education, educating and telling people what we actually mean. I always ask my ladies, when we go on conferences or when we have interactions, what do you understand under the word empowerment? Or when we talk about gender equality, and many of them will talk about, no, we want to be, people will say, but Zenzi, you are equal. There are 50% women in the industry. I'm like, no, we're actually just 17% of the intake. Yeah. So 2017, 2018 figures show that the industry in Namibia at least had employed about 8,000 permanent workers in the mining industry. Of that 8,000, 2,000, 1,500 approximately, about 17% equates to be women. And of that 17%, only 10% are in senior management roles, executive roles, that is. That shows you how far we are. We've got so much more work to do. And the only way we can do that is if both parties, both genders come to the party. I say that if I'm no longer looked at as a female geologist, then we've reached gender equality. If we no longer say, oh, let's look at the gender policy and it's 10 men sitting around the table deciding on what must be the best way to look at gender in the industry. We've got a long way to go.
Zenzi, and before we wrap up this interview, I just want to ask you a question. As a woman in the industry, what advice would you give to young females out there who are starting their career or I guess like looking for joining our industry? What would you tell them?
You need to understand why you're joining the industry, one. Number two, you need to understand the limitations of the industry. You will be sent to remote sites because our deposits are in remote sites. You will not find a deposit. You'll be lucky if you are close by a capital city or something. So you need to be very certain you know what you get yourself into. A lot of young ladies find themselves on remote sites and say, this is not what I signed up for. Then it defeats the purpose of what we are trying to do. So you need to know what you're getting yourself into and why you are there. It's a industry, don't get it wrong. We love it out here, but know why you're joining it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Zenzi, for your time. We really appreciate it. And
no, you're welcome.
Please stay safe.
Thank you, likewise.